Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Huda Abdelhai. I head up the portfolio of HR talent events at Informa Middle East. We are just going to start in a couple of minutes. If you can just wait, we're waiting for a few more people to join in. Okay, I think we are ready to go. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, which is going to be discussing leadership and the leaders that we need today. Today's webinar is going to be presented by Tammy Erickson, the Professor of Organizational Behavior at the London Business School. Tammy is an expert on leadership, the changing workforce, collaboration, and innovation, and the nature of work in intelligent organizations. A McKinsey award-winning author, she has been 3 times named one of the 50 most influential global management thinkers by Thinkers 50. Tammy is also one of the headline keynote speakers at the HR Summit and Expo, taking place next week between the 4th to the 6th of November in Dubai, the Dubai Convention Center. At the summit, Tammy will be speaking on leading business into the future and how to create a pipeline of new leaders that is needed for business today. Before we move on, I would like to cover a few housekeeping points. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will be able to share a link with you after the event is complete in a couple of weeks before end of the work week. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with your colleagues as well. We also invite your comments, questions, and feedback. Please look at the Q&A chat box on your screen. If you think of a question for the speaker at any point, just type it in there. And in the last 15 minutes, we'll pose the questions to Tammy to answer. Attendees of this webinar will also be getting a special last-minute offer to register for the HR Summit that is taking place next week to see Tammy live, along with other 50 keynote speakers, including best-selling author Marcus Buckingham. At this time, I'm going to hand over the floor to Tammy, who is going to start today's presentation. Tammy, it's all yours.
Thank you, Hoda. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. And I do hope we'll see a lot of you in Dubai next week. I'm very much looking forward to being there, I know. Today, I'd like to begin the conversation about leadership. When I'm together with you in Dubai, I'll be talking more specifically about some of the approaches you can use to develop leaders. But today, let's begin thinking about the type of leaders that will be most important for leading businesses into the future. What do you think of this question? Just reflect on it in your mind. I wonder how many of you would agree with it wholeheartedly. We hear so much about the trends and the technologies and the political waves and all that's buffeting our businesses today. And often it feels like it's a time of very major change. Well, the truth be told is, I don't know if this sentence is true or not, and I'm not quite sure how one would even measure that. There certainly have been times in the past when there has been tremendous change buffeting any particular industry. In fact, as we all know, there have been industries that have been completely wiped out at various points in history. So change is something that is with us. And what I find most interesting in the work that I do is to look at the way leaders behave during times of change. My area of research focuses on the relationship between leaders, their actions, and the organizations that they influence. So the questions that I'm most interested in are, how do leaders influence organizations, both in times of stability and in times of great change, to be most successful? Now, what I don't like about this sentence is that it causes a lot of leaders, I think, to give up. I have many people say to me, well, it's such a time of change, I think I'll just wait till I retire and let somebody else worry about it. And that's not the best, obviously, approach, because a time of great change is also a time of great opportunity. It's a time when you can invent new things, you can try new things, you can experiment, and you should, in fact, be looking at very different ways of leading your business than you may have even in the past 10 to 20 years. Now, here's a saying that I would recommend to you as you think about the kind of leadership that you need for the future. It's an old saying. It comes out of engineering theory and others, but it basically says that the form has to follow the function. Now, what that means in leadership terms is, before you decide the type of leadership that's required in your organization, you have to first ask yourself, what does your organization need to do in order to be successful? What's the function? What's the most important thing that your organization will need to do in order to be successful in the future? And then think about the kinds of leaders and the leadership approaches that would be most likely to generate that kind of activity. Now, when we think back in history, we can see that the answer to that question changes over time. Here's an example of silk weaving, based back in the 1700s. Silk weaving obviously was a major craft industry in many parts of the world. And in silk weaving, the basis of competition was quality, clearly. The person who wove the most beautiful silk would be able to sell hers. People who wove lower quality probably wouldn't, or would have to do it at a much lower price. So the price was determined after the silk was woven. Someone would inspect it and determine the price to be paid. There was tremendous flexibility because there was no commitment to buy the silk. It was dependent upon inspection of the quality after the fact. That kind of an approach, lots of flexibility, workers who essentially were contingent upon the success of their efforts, their work efforts, for the compensation they received, was enormously successful in a craft industry. It gave them the kind of flexibility and also the focus on the function that would be most differentiating, quality. When we moved into an industrial era, things changed dramatically, because now it was not a matter of flexibility. The question now became, how do we make a lot at a very consistent quality, but more importantly, at the lowest possible cost? The key points of differentiation now become quantity and cost. And so the approach, the whole philosophy of how you structure your business, the activities that leaders would be involved in, change 180 degrees. Now we standardize processes, we cut them into small, specialized pieces. Leaders dictate single directions from the top, which is cascaded down in a hierarchical fashion and executed in a very routine manner by a variety of people on the assembly line. Again, very appropriate approaches for the kinds of functions that these organizations were trying to achieve. In this case, quantity and low cost. The reality is that our ideas about how to lead, however, tend to get lost in the kind of accumulated debris of our organization. As organizations grow, we have assumptions that were valid at one point, were put in place a number of years ago, but layers of additional activity have covered them over. And so one of the ideas to think about as you consider your organization and its needs for the future is to think about what business practices are buried under the surface. What are you doing that no longer really is necessary? It may have been brilliant at one time, but it's not necessarily something that is particularly relevant to what you're trying to accomplish today. So excavate down, try to find those hidden assumptions and surface the question of whether the practice remains relevant. And try not to be overwhelmed by the trends. There's so many things going on. It's easy to be lost in the minutia of today. I find many leaders lose themselves in all of the things that are hitting our desk and our attention on a daily basis. We can be easily distracted by the headlines. We can get caught up on fixing the problems of yesterday or dealing with the crises of today. But instead of that, try to focus on the forward-thinking question. What will make your business stand out? That's really what I mean by the word iconic. What will make your business special? What will differentiate your business? If we were looking back from the future at businesses in the next 10 years, what would cause people to remember your business as one of the special ones that was really doing some interesting things in the year 2025 or 2030? What will you be doing? So identify those functions that will make your business iconic. And by doing that, I think it will give you an advantage in focusing your leadership on what will achieve those outcomes. Now, I don't know, I don't have a crystal ball, and I'm not sure exactly what companies will be doing, but I do, from my research, have some fairly strong views about the category of activities that I think represent the most important work today and over the upcoming decades. I like to call it mobilizing intelligence. That's a broad category, but it includes a whole host of activities associated with, well, thinking, with getting people to think, with getting people excited about using their brains and their intelligence toward the benefits of our organization. Some of the things that I would include in this broad bucket are shown here. Innovation clearly would be one of the key activities. The idea of looking for ways to bring together ideas that haven't been combined before to have an aha insight about a new way something could be done or a new service or product that could be offered. I think one of the most important categories of mobilizing intelligence is getting people to be more attuned to the outside world, to sense more palpably what's happening around us, to think about what the implications are of what's happening around us to our business today, to detect and anticipate. Another important category is what I call curation of data. So using the data that we have, we all know we're overwhelmed with it, but using it in a way that thinks about how do we harness it in order to provide value to people? How do we create value out of data? What kinds of data would be most useful to be collecting, and how could we translate that into something that would provide value to our customers and others? Customization will clearly be a very important element as we think about the future. And how do we get people to use their intelligence to understand each individual customer and think about the kinds of ways that the services or products you offer could be customized to the needs of those relationships? How do we disseminate information? Clearly, sending everything to everyone is nonsensical. And so thinking about how to share the most important information with people who can really find it beneficial is another important element of using our intelligence in today's world. Collaborating is clearly important. How do we think about where the greatest return on investment in collaboration will occur? We don't want everyone working with everyone. That would just completely stop all forward activity in most organizations. But strategically identifying those areas where working together pays off is a very important element of success for the future. And very importantly, being adaptable. How do we identify ways where we can quickly move from one option to another? Where do we need the greatest options? How can we build organizations that give us the kind of agility that we need in order to respond to uncertainties that may lie ahead? And of course, learning. How do we embed what we've learned into ongoing processes across our organizations? I believe that these kinds of activities are the things that companies that are successful over the next several decades will do very, very well. Now you notice that I don't have words in here like quality and quantity and cost. Will those still be important? Absolutely. Absolutely they will. But my point is, I don't think they'll be differentiating. I think lots of people will be able to make lots of goods. I think lots of people will be able to do it at low cost. And I even think lots of people will be able to do things at high quality. The differentiation will come from the newness, from sensing, from innovating, from customizing, from collaborating, from adapting. This kind of intelligence-based activity is where one company will be set apart from another. Now, if you look at this list of activities, I wonder if anything strikes you about them. The conclusion that I come to is that they're all activities that have to occur in some ways inside a person. They're intellectual activities. They're things that require us to think. And so my conclusion as I think about leadership for the future is that the activities that are most important will only occur if we can get individuals to choose to care and to choose to think. I think these two things represent one of the greatest challenges for leaders today. How do you get the people in your organization to choose to care and to choose to think? The bottom line is an individual's willingness to invest that level of discretionary effort, and by discretionary here, I mean choice-based effort, to choose. How do you get individuals to be willing to invest discretionary effort? Because I believe that will make or break your organization's success. I also believe accepting this fact is one of the first steps to becoming a great leader. In other words, giving up on the idea of what I would call heroic leadership, the idea that leaders can charge in on a white horse and save the day single-handedly. That's an old idea and not a relevant one as we think about groups of people coming together to provide collective intelligence to solve today's issues. Now, the challenge we face is that most of our organizations are still built on old assumptions. They're still built like they were running a machine. So we have practices in most organizations that include those shown on this page. We use authority based on command and control. We tell people at the top tell people in the middle who tell people at the bottom what to do, and that's how the organization runs. We often have a reliance on utilization metrics, and we love the efficiencies of mass production. Perhaps you have an organization that's filled with bureaucratic structures, lots of matrices and cross-checking and committees that can meet and decide and discuss for checking on actions. We have organizations that like consistency and predictability. that eliminate variation. And many of our philosophies, our strategies, are based on keeping a little bit of distance from customers. The idea that if they don't know everything, if we don't have complete transparency, we'll be able to gain an advantage over the marketplace through kind of a win-lose or zero-sum philosophy mentality. Now, here's the thing. These practices are fantastic if you're trying to compete based on scale and cost. If what you want to do is make a lot of stuff at a very low cost, I would recommend that you maintain these practices in full form. These are perfect. When they were developed in the early 1900s, they were brilliant leadership breakthroughs, brand new insights about the best way to do things. Very powerful and very differentiating. But here's the downside. All of these things will kill your ability to mobilize intelligence. None of these things promote the mobilization of intelligence within your organization. So if you want to do that, we need to think of new ways to lead. And how would you do that? Because we're talking about activities fundamentally that can't be standardized. And remember, standardizing processes was one of the fundamental foundational activities of the industrial era, standardization. Well, these processes really can't be standardized. They can't be required. You can't order me to do one of these things. You could ask me to, but the reality is I can't be forced to do it. And in fact, you won't even know if people are doing it to the very best of their ability. They can look you right in the eye and tell you they tried their hardest to innovate, but you're not ever going to be 100% sure if they did. That difference depends on them. It depends on their degree to which they want to do things for the benefit of your organization, the degree to which they care, the degree to which they are able to make that important difference. It's a little bit like the old saying of you can drag a horse to water, but you can't necessarily force it to drink. So what can a leader do? Well, I think the way I would summarize it most succinctly is leaders have to create an environment where people will choose to join and choose to do their best work. There are a lot of elements to this, as we'll talk about in a moment. People talk about being inspirational and motivating, providing a purpose, making it possible, facilitating it, allowing people to fail, encouraging experimentation. And all of these are very important, but they sum up to the idea of creating an environment where talented people make their own choice about joining and doing great work. If you ask me to choose your leaders, here's what I'd look for and what I would recommend you look for when you think about leaders for your future. Ask yourself, is this a person that other people want to work for? Are people saying, is there a buzz in your organization of people saying, boy, I wish I could work for that individual. They really are special. I want to be part of that person's group. Listen for that within your organization. Do their teams have a sense of passion and of commitment? Look at how people feel about coming into work and whether there's that sense of emotional commitment to the organization in the teams that these people lead. Look for evidence that new ideas emerge. Are these people who are doing their work the same old way they always have? Or is this a group that is constantly coming up with new approaches and provocative ideas and creative ways to consider how they go about their business? And importantly, Look at whether people are more valuable after they've worked with this individual for some period of time. Do they learn? Do they grow? Are they challenged? And do they gain in their asset value after having done work in this particular group? These are the kinds of criteria that you should be using to evaluate your leaders, to select your future pipeline. And they're the kinds of things I'll be talking about when we're together in Dubai next week. I'll be speaking on November 6th, the last day of the conference, and I do hope to see many of you there. I'll be covering these topics. From the work that I've done in studying a number of leaders who do successfully create great environments, I offer you a 4-part model of actions that leaders can take. Think of these as levers, in a sense, that leaders can pull. And what I would say is that leaders who create the kind of environment that has the results we've just discussed do these 4 things in a fairly consistent way. Great leaders ensure that there's always new thinking, new perspectives coming into their group. They ensure a continual infusion of newness. They also ask great questions. Great leaders ask more questions than they give instructions. They make it easy for information to flow throughout the organization. They connect people with different insights and ideas. And they build a meaningful and tangible purpose. Again, when we're together in Dubai, I'll say a bit more about each of these, but let me just give you the highlights now. Disrupt has several parts or several approaches. None of them are particularly difficult, but they are the kind of things that leaders often forget about when they're under pressure or feeling stressed by the burdens of today. One is you need to continually bring in provocative or unsettling ideas. You can do that by hiring diverse people, bringing in people from other industries. You can bring in speakers. You can expose people to articles. You can give them TED Talks and videos that talk about provocative new ways of thinking. You can discuss them in your staff meetings. There's a host of ways that you can keep people thinking about what's on the edge. You can send people out. I like to say to play in the intersection. In other words, send them out to places where things are happening, where there's a collision of ideas going on. Again, you can send them to look at other companies. You can send them, particularly I like to talk to customers. You can send them out to academia, to conferences, to ways that they can get exposed to a variety of new ways of thinking. And importantly, as leaders, you need to make it okay to talk about these new ideas back in your organization. Don't let some of the naysayers shut down the new thinking quickly. Make sure you legitimize and celebrate the diverse ideas and hold open discussion for new perspectives. Intrigue is about asking important questions. One of the advantages of questions is they draw people in. It turns out that if you give an instruction, it can often shut people down. I want you to fix that, is a much more demoralizing way of speaking to someone than saying, I wonder how we might fix that, which is a much more engaging and enticing way to pull someone in to care about finding a solution to a problem. So the job of leaders today is to figure out what some of these intriguing questions might be. And one of the best ways is to spend your time understanding the customers that you serve. Try to identify important tensions that they're feeling, what their unmet needs might be, and where the opportunities might be for you to do something that would be spectacularly better for them. Again, phrase your questions as how might we, and pull people in to participating with you in finding the solution. and encourage experimentation. Teach people how to do experiments well, to do them quickly and cheaply, to figure out whether something works, to give it a try, and try a variety of new things to try to find the solutions that would be most effective. Connecting is about opening your organization up to a free flow of information. It's not your job to order people to talk to each other. That's crazy. It's your job to make it easy for people to share insights and ideas. And the best way to do that is to ensure that your organization is filled with trust-based relationships. You want to help people develop their own networks. Make sure people know each other. Make communication easy and efficient. Don't waste people's time on bureaucratic processes, but give them the time they need to actually seek out and interact with people who have the most to share in their particular area of interest. And role model that activity yourself. Make sure you're constantly seen, sharing openly with others. And finally, maybe the one that sets the whole process in motion. Engage with a meaningful and tangible purpose. Now, creating this has several parts. One is being authentic and tangible by communicating something which is both unique and compelling, understanding what that means to people. That's maybe the most important step. Translating what you say into what people think it means. You should be openly talking with people about what do you expect? What did you expect when you chose to join our organization? How are we doing on delivering on that experience? Those three parts are very important in creating a sense of engagement. And don't forget the element of unique. To the extent you can create an organization that is very attractive to the people who choose to join it, but isn't necessarily one that everyone would love, that actually makes your organization stronger. Don't try to be everything to everyone, but try to create a strong organization for people who choose to join it. So the four levers again and again, if leaders do these on a consistent basis through simple techniques, many of which we'll discuss when we're together in Dubai, they can create a very powerful environment that people will choose to join and in which they'll choose to do great work. Leaders need to disrupt with new perspectives, intrigue with great questions, connect to make it easy to share insights and ideas, and engage with a meaningful and tangible purpose. These four techniques, these four levers, are what's required for leadership going into the future and should be an important part of your consideration as you think about the pipeline you're building for your future. Leaders need to own the experience. They need to build a great experience for your organization. I hope this has given you some useful ideas about the kinds of things we'll be talking about. Here's how you can be in touch with me. And as I said, I hope that you'll be in touch in person in Dubai on November 6th. Now, Hoda, let me ask, do we have any questions?
Yes, actually, we have a couple of questions. Firstly, let me thank you, Tammy, for this amazing presentation. And yeah, so we have just a few questions. One is from Sylvia Zaki, and her question was, what is the difference between adapting and customizing? So I'm guessing it was reference to an earlier slide that you were showing.
Yes, it's a good question. So they are very much related. When I'm using the word adapting, I'm usually talking about a broader business kind of adaptation. So for example, being able to change the characteristics of the product you're producing or changing the way you deliver a service. When I help companies think about creating an adaptable or agile environment, we often think about questions of design. How do we identify areas where their greatest uncertainty exists and design an organization that gives people the easy option of switching from one way of doing things to another? When I talk about customization, I'm thinking more specifically at the individual level of working with a customer or group of customers. How do we understand their needs? How do we think about taking within our broad range of services and adapting them to meet their particular needs? So there's a level of granularity associated with the way I use the word customize that's a bit different than the way I use adaptable.
Fantastic. We actually have just one more question from Sylvia as well, and she is basically asking, how how can I be sure that after training people they will invest in a learning curve with the organization and not taking to other companies? So I guess when talking about turnover, so that's to kind of keep the learning within the organization and make it useful for within the business itself. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Sylvia. And you're not going to, I'm sure, be thrilled with my answer. But the bottom line is you can't. You can't ensure that. In fact, I don't think you should worry about it. The bottom line is what you need to do is offer great learning opportunities over the course of a person's career. A person should always feel that staying at your organization for another 2 or 3 years will provide them with additional learning opportunities. And if people reach a point where they feel that you've taught them everything you possibly could, and that now you're just simply wanting to reap a return on that investment, the reality is in today's environment, people won't stay. There's no way you can lock someone in to have them stay if they don't feel they're continuing to learn. And so the secret is you have to provide a continuous learning opportunity. And that's the best way to get the return on the learning that you've already provided.
Fantastic answer, Tammy. So we have one more question here from Kingsley. To bring the four corners of leadership together, how have you witnessed the leaders change the status quo?
Well, there are a number of interesting examples, I think, of leaders who have made some very dramatic changes in the status quo. One of the things that I would say parenthetically is that I do think we're at a time where leaders need to be a bit more clear when they send signals about change. This is not a time to be subtle. If you want to change your environment from one of a very industrially oriented kind of an approach to one that is more encouraging of intelligence and innovation and so forth, you often need to make some pretty clear signals that change is underway so that people completely realize that you're moving in a direction and not planning to backtrack. Now, as an example of an organization that has done this, I think, rather successfully, I would point to Microsoft. Microsoft, up until the last CEO, Mr. Satya Nadella, was a very inwardly looking organization. It ran on strong competitive norms. It had performance review approaches that pitted one person against another. People used to say the best way to be successful was to make the other guy look bad. So it was very internally competitive. It was inwardly looking, and it had stalled in the marketplace point of view. When Mr. Nadella came in, he opened the organization up. He brought in people from the outside. He created partnerships with people on the outside. He invited provocative people to attend leadership meetings and offer disruptive points of view. He posed interesting and intriguing questions to people about how they could serve customers in different ways. He refreshed the organization's purpose and meaning, coming up with a new statement and really touching people to restrike some of the old chords of excitement that the Microsoft had had in its earliest days. And maybe most importantly, he insisted on a culture of connection, of collaboration. He fired some of the people who had been most prominently, I guess I would say, competitive, and promoted people who had reputations of working collaboratively and empathetically with others. So he used the 4 levers that I spoke about and has made a very dramatic change in the culture at Microsoft. It's something that any organization can do with determination and a systematic approach.
Fantastic. Thank you for that answer, Tammy. I think we have one last question to go from Natalia. She said the 4 ways you presented for leaders to create context make complete sense. Question, how do you spark the need for self-awareness for leaders to do things differently when they have reached a comfort zone and are not aware of their blind spots?
Well, that's a very good question, too. Well, I'll tell you how I do it, and I'm not sure it's the only way to do it, but the way that I do it is kind of by teasing people through a series of, logical explorations of what's going to be required for the future. And then almost, I would almost use the word tricking them into agreeing that there's no way they can achieve that through their old methods. So getting people to think about things like, how would you get someone to innovate, and what's required for innovation, and really digging into that. And then thinking about what role do you as a leader have in encouraging that. I'll tell you one story. One of the things that I do at London Business School is teach a program for people who want to become the next CEO of their organization. So I have very senior people who come and spend a week with me. And I always have dinner with them on the first night of the program. And a few times ago, I had a very senior individual, clearly enormously successful, very self-confident, and he had, risen up to be the next in line to be the CEO of his company. And he stood up at the dinner on the first night and basically just lit into me. He said he didn't want to be at this program. He thought it was stupid and he didn't need it and didn't want to be here. And he knew everything there was to be about being a leader. And he proceeded to tell me that the way to be a leader was to tell people exactly what to do, to watch them to make sure they did exactly what you had told them to do, and then to fire them if they didn't. And that's all that was required for leadership. And he didn't think there was anything he could learn from the program he was about to sit through. Now, I'm very pleased to tell you that by the end of the week, by Friday, he came up to me a bit sheepishly and admitted that the program had changed his life, that it had given him such a new perspective on people and on the way to work with people for the kinds of challenges that we have for the future, that it had changed his life. It had changed his perspective. So I think with very bright, very senior people, it's a matter of, in a sense, giving them information that allows them to come to the self-realization, the conclusion themselves that they're going to need to do things very differently in order to be successful going forward.
Thank you for that answer, Tammy. I think that's all the questions that we have time for today. And I wanted to thank everyone for sending in the questions and keeping this webinar an engaging one. One quick reminder before we end today. Again, obviously, Tammy mentioned she is speaking at the HR Summit next week on the 6th of November, and we will be following up on email for the attendees of today's webinar with a special discount code for people to register for the summit. So I think we're all done for today, unless Tammy wanted to add anything further.
Not from my end, except again, a warm invitation to and hope that I see you there.
Fantastic. Well, I think that ends it for today. Thank you all for attending, and thank you again, Tammy, for giving us your time to share this insightful presentation today.
You're very welcome.
Take care.